In the heart of the Silver Moon pack, a servant girl lived in the shadows, her body a secret tapestry of scars hidden beneath her drab clothes. For years she endured the cruelty of her Lunar, the Alpha's beloved mate, serving her with trembling hands and a bowed head. She never dreamed of freedom, never dared to hope for more. But one fateful night, a slip of a sleeve reveals a single brutal mark. It's a mark her Alpha recognizes, a symbol of a pain he never knew his mate was capable of inflicting. The sight shatters his world, unleashing the beast he keeps caged within, and in that moment, everything changes. The scent of lemon polish and old wood clung to Liren like a second skin. It was a smell she'd known for 10 years, ever since she was a scrawny orphan child brought to the pack house to serve. Her world was a kaleidoscope of polished floors, folded linens, and the ever-present cloying perfume of Lunar Valen. Valen was beautiful, with hair the color of spun moonlight and eyes as cold and blue as a winter lake. She was Rykor's mate, the heart of the Silver Moon pack, cherished and adored by all. All except the girl who cleaned her chambers and bore the silent testament of her cruelty. Liren's hands, though nimble and quick, were a roadmap of faint, silvery lines. More scars crisscrossed her back and legs, always carefully concealed beneath the modest gray dress of the serving staff. They were gifts from the lunar tokens of her displeasure, delivered with a sharp word or a sharper fingernail for a misplaced book or a lukewarm cup of tea. Today was the annual mating gala, a night of celebration and revelry. The pack house buzzed with energy, the air thick with anticipation, and the scent of pine from the decorations. Liren's duties were endless. She moved like a phantom through the chaos, her expression carefully neutral, her eyes downcast. Her final task before the guests arrived was to deliver the Lunar's gown. She knocked softly on the door to the Alpha's chambers. "Enter," Valen's voice purred smooth and dangerous. Liren slipped inside, her gaze fixed on the floor. The room was a storm of discarded silks and glittering jewels. Valen stood before a full-length mirror, clad in a silk robe, a frown marring her perfect features. Rykor was beside her, his presence a solid grounding force that filled the room. He was a man carved from granite and authority, his dark hair brushing his collar, his gray eyes missing nothing. The sight of him always made Liren's heart perform a nervous flutter. He was her Alpha, a figure of immense power, but he had never spoken a word directly to her. To him, she was just part of the house's fixtures. "Here is your gown, Lunar," Liren murmured, holding out the garment bag. It was a stunning creation of midnight blue silk, embroidered with silver thread to mimic the constellations. Valen didn't turn. "Drape it on the shades and be quick about it. You've been dawdling all day." "Yes, Lunar," Liren whispered. As she moved toward obey, her foot caught on a discarded velvet slipper. She stumbled, the gown slipping from her grasp. A collective gasp seemed to suck the air from the room. Liren's breath hitched in her throat as she scrambled to catch the dress before it hit the floor. She succeeded, but the sudden movement caused the loose sleeve of her drab dress to fall away from her arm. For a single horrifying second, the scarred skin of her forearm was exposed under the bright vanity lights. A lattice of old white scars, and one newer, angrier one, a thin red line from her wrist to her elbow. It was only a moment. She quickly pulled her sleeve down her heart, hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. But the moment was enough. Valen's eyes, reflected in the mirror, narrowed into icy slits. But it wasn't her mate Rykor that was looking at her. His gaze was fixed on Liren, his expression unreadable, yet intense enough to feel like a physical touch. He hadn't been looking at her, but at her arm. A strange stillness fell over him, a coiling tension that made the air crackle. "Get out, Valen," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "You are dismissed for the evening. Go to your room." "Yes, Luna," Liren murmured, not daring to look at the Alpha. She backed out of the room, her cheeks burning with shame and terror, the ghost of his stare still imprinted on her skin. She fled to the servants' quarters, her mind a maelstrom of fear. Valen would make her pay for this. She always did. But as she huddled in her small plain room, she couldn't shake the image of the Alpha's face. It wasn't anger she had seen, or disgust. It was something else entirely. A flicker of recognition, a darkness that mirrored the shadows in her own soul. For the first time she wondered if the Alpha truly saw his Lunar for the perfect mate everyone believed her to be. Rykor felt as if the world had tilted on its axis. The image of that scarred arm was burned into his mind. He had seen scars before, the marks of battle, the honorable wounds of a warrior. But these were different. They were thin, deliberate, and overlapping. Marks of punishment, not conflict. And the newest one, it was fresh. What was that? His voice was a low growl vibrating with a tightly leashed power. Valen turned from her mirror, a practiced look of confusion gracing her features. What was what, my love? That clumsy girl nearly ruined my gown. Her arm, Rykor said, his eyes never leaving her reflection. I saw her arm. A flicker of something, was it fear, crossed her face before it was smoothed away by a dismissive laugh. Oh, that. She's a servant from the lower districts. They're a rough lot. She probably got into a brawl over some trinket. You know how they are. Her casual dismissal scraped against something raw inside him. You know how they are. As if they were a different species. As if their pain was meaningless. He had trusted Valen implicitly, had put her on a pedestal. She was his Lunar, the mother of his future heir, the serene and graceful counterpart to his own rough-hewn nature. He had believed in the image she projected with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. But that image was cracking. She works in our home, under your command, he pressed, taking a step closer. The scent of her expensive perfume filled his senses, but for the first time it seemed cloying, artificial. Have you ever seen those marks before? Rykor, really, she said, her tone shifting to one of mild exasperation. She turned to face him, placing a manicured hand on his chest. Why are you so concerned with a servant's squabbles? Tonight is about us, about the pack. Let's not allow some clumsy girl to spoil it. He looked down at her hand, at the perfectly shaped nails, painted a deep crimson, the same nails that could so easily inflict a thin red line on delicate skin. The thought came unbidden, a viper striking in his mind. He pushed it away, disgusted with himself. This was Valen, his mate. He was letting his imagination run wild. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling of profound unease. The way the girl Lyren, he thought her name was, had flinched, the absolute terror in her eyes. It wasn't the look of someone caught in a common brawl. It was the look of prey. I want to know her name, he said, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth he usually reserved for his mate. Valen's smile tightened. Her name is unimportant. Her name, he repeated. And this time it was not a request. It was the command of an alpha. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with his authority. She recoiled slightly, her blue eyes wide with surprise. He rarely used that tone with her. Lyren, she finally conceded, her voice strained. Now can we please put this behind us? The guests will be arriving soon. Rykor gave a curt nod, but his mind was far from the gala. He allowed her to lead him from the room, to play the part of the devoted alpha. But a seed of doubt had been planted. And as he smiled at his pack members, shaking hands and accepting their well wishes, his wolf was pacing restlessly beneath his skin. It was agitated, unsettled, sniffing the air for a lie it couldn't yet place. Later that evening, while Valen was charming a visiting delegation, Rykor slipped away. He didn't go to the servants' quarters. That would be too obvious, too disruptive. Instead, he went to his office and summoned his beta, a grizzled, loyal wolf named Kalen. I have a task for you, Rykor said, without preamble, staring out the window at the glittering festivities below. It requires the utmost discretion. Kalen straightened his expression. She works in the Lunar's service. He paused, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I want to know everything about her, where she came from, who her family was. And I want you to find out how she got the scars on her arms. Kalen's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he was too disciplined to question his alpha's orders. Scars don't ask questions, just find the answers, Rykor commanded, his voice tight. And Kalen, be careful. I have a feeling we are treading on delicate ground. And as his beta departed, Rykor was left alone with his thoughts. He had built his pack on principles of strength, honor, and protection. He was sworn to protect every member, from the highest-ranking warrior to the most humble servant. If he had failed in that duty, if the danger was not from outside the pack but from within his own home, from the one person he was supposed to trust above all others, then he wasn't just a failed alpha. He was a fool, and his wolf would not suffer a fool. The pack house walls had ears. Liren had learned that long ago. She knew which floorboards creaked, which vents carried voices from the floor below, and which of the older servants, their faces etched with a lifetime of weary compliance, would watch her with pitying eyes, but never speak up. After the incident in the Lunar's chamber, Liren became a ghost in her own life. Valen had confined her to the laundry rooms in the deep, damp cellars of the pack house, a punishment cloaked as a reassignment. Down here, the air was thick with the smell of Lysol and hot steam, a place of endless, mind-numbing labor. It was a place to be forgotten. But Liren was grateful. The scalding water and heavy lifting were a welcome distraction from the fear that coiled in her belly. Every footstep in the hall above made her flinch, expecting the Lunar's arrival a prelude to a new kind of pain. The physical torment she could bear. It was the waiting that unraveled her. A week passed in this steamy purgatory. One evening, as she was folding a mountain of hot linens, a soft voice startled her. "Liren!" She spun around to find Serene, the elderly head cook, standing in the doorway. Seren's face was kind-lined with the wisdom of many years serving the pack, and her eyes held a sorrow that Liren knew was reserved just for her. "Liren, sweetheart." Seren breathed, her shoulders slumping in relief. "The Lunar is occupied with the accounts." "Tonight," the old woman said, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. She held out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. "I brought you something. You're looking as thin as a reed." Inside the bundle was a warm pastry filled with meat and gravy. Liren's stomach rumbled in betrayal. She hadn't realized how hungry she was. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick. Seren watched her eat with a pained expression. "Child, what happened at the gala?" Liren froze the pastry halfway to her lips. She shook her head, unable to speak. To speak of it was to make it more real, to give the Lunar's cruelty a voice. "You don't have to tell me," Seren said, gently placing a work-worn hand on Liren's arm. Her touch was warm, motherly. "We've all seen it. For years. We see the way she looks at you. The accidents that happen only when you are near." Tears welled in Liren's eyes, hot and shameful. To have her secret pain acknowledged was both a relief and a terror. "Why?" Liren finally choked out the question that had haunted her for a decade. "Why does she hate me so much?" Seren sighed, a sound heavy with regret. "It's not you she hates, child. It's what you represent." She glanced around nervously, then lowered her voice. "Your parents. They were not just any members of this pack. Your mother, Thalia, she was the Alpha's first love." Liren stared, uncomprehending. "What before Valen?" "Before any of it." Seren explained, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Rykor and Thalia grew up together. Everyone thought they were destined mates. He adored her, but she was a free spirit, not destined to be a Lunar. Her wolf was gentle, more healer than warrior. On her 18th birthday, when the mate bond didn't snap into place, she chose to be with your father, a talented craftsman named Alan. They were in love a true love match, even without the fated bond. Rykor was heartbroken, but he accepted it. He was an honorable man even then. He let her go. Liren's head was spinning. Her parents had died in a rogue attack when she was a child. That's all she'd ever been told. No one ever spoke of them. A few years later, the Alpha met Valen. Surin continued. She was from a powerful allied pack, a perfect political match. The fated mate bond struck them both hard and fast. It was settled. But I think Valen always knew she wasn't his first choice. She saw the way he sometimes looked at your mother, the lingering friendship and affection in his eyes. And then she looked at you and she saw your mother's face. You have her eyes, her smile. It all clicked into place. The baseless hatred, the relentless cruelty. It was jealousy that had festered for years, aimed at the memory of a dead woman, with her living daughter as the target. When your parents were killed, Serene said, her voice cracking, Valine was the one who suggested you be brought to the pack house to be cared for. We all thought it was a kindness. We were fools. The pastry was tasteless in Liren's mouth. Her entire life, her entire identity had been a lie. She wasn't just an orphan. She was a ghost at the feast, a constant living reminder of the Lunar's deepest insecurity. Suddenly, the heavy door to the laundry swung open with a loud bang, making both women jump. Kalen, the Alpha's beta, stood there, his face an impassive mask. His eyes scanned the room before landing on Liren. The Alpha wants to see you, he said, his voice deep and commanding. Liren's blood ran cold. Saren squeezed her arm, a silent message of support, before scurrying out of the room. Liren was left alone with the beta, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The Alpha wanted to see her. Her first thought was that the Lunar had told him some lie, that she was to be punished for her clumsiness, for daring to exist. She wiped her hands on her apron, her body trembling uncontrollably. Now, Kalen said, his tone leaving no room for argument. With leaden feet, she followed him out of the steamy cellar and up the winding stone staircases, each step taking her further from the shadows and closer to the man who held her life and now her history in his hands. She was no longer just Liren the servant. She was Thalia's daughter. And she had a terrifying feeling that Rykor knew it too. The Alpha's office was a world away from the damp cellars. Rich mahogany shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound books and ancient pack records. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across a large oak desk. The air smelled of wood smoke, old paper, and something else. Something wild and powerful that was purely Rykor. He was standing by the window, his back to the door, staring out into the moonlit night. He didn't turn when Kalen escorted her in and closed the door with a soft click, leaving them alone. The silence stretched thick and heavy with unspoken words. Liren stood frozen just inside the doorway, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Finally he spoke, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. Your mother's name was Thalia. It wasn't a question. Liren's breath caught in her throat. Yes, Alpha. He turned then, and the full force of his gaze hit her. His gray eyes were intense, stormy, filled with a raw emotion she couldn't decipher. It wasn't the detached authority she was used to. This was something personal, something deeply unsettled. She had a laugh like wind chimes, he said, his voice softening with memory. And she used to get a little smudge of dirt on her nose when she gardened. She loved wolfsbane flowers, even though they were useless to us. Liren could only stare speechless. He was speaking of her mother with a familiarity that stole her breath. Serene's words echoed in her mind. He adored her. Rykor gestured to the chair in front of his desk. Sit, Liren, he said. Hesitantly, she obeyed, perching on the edge of the plush leather seat. It was the first time in her life she had sat in his presence. It felt like a transgression. He moved to his desk but didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against it, his arms crossed over his powerful chest, studying her face. Kalen's report was thorough. He told me about your parents, about the rogue attack. He also told me that after their deaths, all of their personal effects were mysteriously lost in a fire in the storage sheds. He paused, his eyes narrowing. A fire no one seems to remember. Lyran felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Show me your arm," he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. Her heart leaped into her throat. This was it, the moment of judgment. Slowly, her hands trembling, she pushed up the sleeve of her dress, revealing the scarred terrain of her forearm. She kept her eyes fixed on her lap, unable to watch his reaction. He said nothing for a long time. She could feel his gaze on her skin, tracing every mark, every raised line. Then he moved. He knelt in front of her, a gesture so unexpected, so shocking for an alpha, that her head snapped up. He was close, so close she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the tense set of his jaw. He gently took her arm, his large, warm hand dwarfing hers. His touch was surprisingly soft, reverent, almost as his thumb brushed lightly over the angry red line that marred her skin. His touch sent a jolt, a strange, forbidden warmth through her. "This one is new," he stated, his voice a guttural growl. "It happened the day of the gala, didn't it? Before you brought the gown." She couldn't find her voice. She could only manage a slight, terrified nod. A low, menacing sound rumbled in his chest. It was the sound of a wolf on the verge of snapping its leash. His eyes, when they met hers again, were blazing with a fury so profound it was terrifying. But it wasn't directed at her. "Who did this to you, Lyran?" he asked, though the grim certainty on his face told her he already knew the answer. Tears she hadn't even realized she was holding back began to fall, hot tracks of shame and fear, down her cheeks. Kalen, the Alpha's beta, stood there, his face a neutral mask. His eyes scanned the room before landing on Lyran. "The Alpha wants to see you," he said, his voice deep and commanding. Lyran's blood ran cold. Saren squeezed her arm, offering a silent gesture of support before scurrying out of the room. Lyran was left alone with the beta, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The Alpha wanted to see her. Her first thought was that the Lunar had spun some lie, that she was about to be punished for her clumsiness, for daring to exist. She wiped her hands on her apron, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Now," Kalen said, his tone leaving no room for argument. With leaden feet, she followed him out of the damp cellar and up the winding stone staircases, each step taking her further from the shadows, closer to the man who held her fate and now her history in his hands. She was no longer just Lyran the servant. She was Thalia's daughter, and she had a terrifying feeling that Rykor knew it too. The Alpha's office was worlds away from the musty cellars. Rich mahogany shelves lined the walls, filled with leather-bound books and ancient pack records. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across a large oak desk. The air smelled of wood smoke, old paper, and something else, something wild, something that was purely Rykor. He stood by the window, his back to the door, staring out into the moonlit night. He didn't turn when Kalen escorted her in and shut the door with a soft click, leaving them alone. The silence hung thick and heavy with unspoken words. Lyran stood frozen, just inside the doorway, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Finally he spoke, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "Your mother's name was Thalia." It wasn't a question. Lyran's breath hitched. "Yes, Alpha." He turned then, and the full force of his gaze hit her. His gray eyes were intense, stormy, filled with raw emotion she couldn't decipher. This wasn't the detached authority she was used to. This was something personal, something deeply unsettled. "She had a laugh like wind chimes," he said, his voice softening with memory. "And she'd get a little smudge of dirt on her nose when she gardened. She loved wolfsbane flowers, even though they were useless to us." Lyran could only stare speechless. He was speaking of her mother with a familiarity that stole her breath away. Saren's words echoed in her mind. He adored her. Rykor gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "Sit, Lyran," he said. Hesitantly, she obeyed, perching on the edge of the plush leather seat. It was the first time in her life she had sat in his presence. It felt like a transgression. He moved to his desk but didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against it, his arms crossed over his powerful chest as he studied her face. "Kaelin's report was thorough. He told me about your parents, about the rogue attack. He also told me that, after their deaths, all their personal effects were mysteriously lost in a fire in the storage sheds." He paused, his eyes narrowing. A fire no one seems to remember. Lyran felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Show me your arm," he commanded, his voice gentle but firm. Her heart leaped into her throat. This was it, the moment of judgment. Slowly, her hands trembling, she pushed up the sleeve of her dress, revealing the scarred terrain of her forearm. She kept her eyes fixed on her lap, unable to watch his reaction. He said nothing for a long time. She could feel his gaze on her skin, tracing every mark, every raised line. Then he moved. He knelt in front of her, a gesture so unexpected, so shocking for an alpha that her head snapped up. He was close, so close that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the tense set of his jaw. He gently took her arm, his large, warm hand dwarfing hers. His touch was surprisingly soft, reverent, almost as his thumb brushed lightly over the angry red line that marred her skin. His touch sent a jolt of strange, forbidden warmth through her. "This one is new," he stated, his voice a guttural growl. "It happened the day of the gala, didn't it? Before you brought the gown." She couldn't find her voice. She could only manage a slight, terrified nod. A low, menacing sound rumbled in his chest. It was the sound of a wolf on the verge of snapping its leash. His eyes, when they met hers again, were blazing with fury, so profound it was terrifying. But it wasn't directed at her. "Who did this to you, Lyran?" he asked, though the grim certainty on his face told her he already knew the answer. Tears she hadn't even realized she was holding back began to fall, hot, shameful tracks of fear down her cheeks. She finally lifted her gaze and looked at Vaylin. For the first time, she didn't see a powerful lunar, but a cornered, frightened woman. The lunar. She was angry I had forgotten to warm her hairbrush. Lyran whispered, her voice barely audible, yet it carried in the intense silence. She said, "My insolence needed a lesson." She used her nail file. The admission hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. The image of the beautiful, graceful lunar torturing a servant with a nail file was so grotesque, so at odds with the person they thought they knew, that it left them speechless. "Lies!" Vaylin shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "The little wretch is lying to save her own skin. She is trying to poison you against me, Rykor. Can't you see it's because of her mother?" The moment the words left her mouth, she knew she had made a fatal mistake. A confused murmur spread through the elders. Rykor's face became a mask of cold fury. "Her mother," he repeated, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "What does Thalia have to do with this?" You always loved her." Vaylin's accusation was wild, desperate. "Even after we were mated, you kept her memory alive. This girl, she looks just like her. She's been a thorn in my side since the day she arrived. A constant reminder that I was never your first choice." It was a confession, an admission of a decade-long jealousy that had festered into monstrous abuse. She had condemned herself with her own words. The pack elders stared at her, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror, then to cold, hard judgment. They were wolves. They understood loyalty, honor, and the protection of the weak. What Vaylin had done was a violation of their most sacred tenets. "You have brought shame upon this pack," Rykor declared, his voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. "You have abused your power, tortured a child under my protection, and dishonored the title of Luna." He turned to the door. "Take her to the cells. She is no longer my mate. She is no longer Luna of the Silver Moon Pack." The council will decide her fate. Valen stared at him, her face a mess of disbelief and fury. As the warriors took her arm, she lunged toward Lyran. Her face twisted in a snarl. You will pay for this, you little nobody. Before she could take another step, Rykor was there, a blur of motion. He placed himself directly between them, shielding Lyran with his body. He didn't touch Valen. He just looked at her, and the look in his eyes, the cold, dead emptiness where his love for her used to be, was more devastating than any blow. She crumbled. All the fight went out of her as the warriors dragged her weeping and screaming from the hall. The great doors boomed shut, leaving a ringing silence in their wake. Rykor stood with his back to Lyran. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of his world had finally crushed him. The bond, the sacred fated mate. Bond had been a lie twisted by cruelty and deceit. He had to sever it, a process that would be excruciating for them both. He had saved Lyran, but he had lost a part of himself. In the echoing silence of the great hall surrounded by his pack, Alpha Rykor had never felt more alone. The days following the reckoning were raw and uncertain. A deep wound had been carved into the heart of the Silver Moon pack, and the severing of the Alpha's mate bond sent ripples of psychic pain through them all. Rykor bore the brunt of it, cloistering himself in his office. For long periods, the agony of a torn soul was etched onto his face. But when he emerged, his resolve was like steel. He was their Alpha, and he would not let them falter. Valen was exiled, stripped of her name and status, sent back to her home pack in disgrace, with two of Rykor's most trusted warriors to ensure she arrived. Her fate was a merciful one decided by the elders. They deemed a lifetime of shame a harsher punishment than a quick death. The pack house felt quieter, cleaner, as if a poison had been purged from its walls. And Lyran was adrift. She was no longer a servant, but she didn't know what else to be. Rykor had given her a comfortable suite of rooms. Ironically, the ones that had once belonged to a visiting dignitary next to his own, and decreed that she was to be treated as a protected member of the pack. The other staff were kind, but their deference and pity created a new kind of wall between them. Siren brought her meals, her kind eyes filled with a sad pride, but Lyran felt like a guest in what was once her prison. She spent her days reading in the vast library, or walking in the garden places she'd only ever been allowed to clean. She was free, but she didn't know how to live in the light. The scars on her arms were fading, but the ones on her soul felt deeper than ever. She was haunted by nightmares, not of Valen's cruelty, but of the look on Rykor's face in the great hall, the profound agony and betrayal. She felt a strange, aching guilt for his pain. One afternoon, she was sitting by a small pond in the garden, watching koi fish swim in lazy circles when he found her. "There you are," Rykor said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. She jumped to her feet, her instinct to serve kicking in. "Alpha," she said, her voice filled with sudden nervousness. "Rykor," he corrected gently. "My name is Rykor." He gestured to the bench. "May I?" She nodded, her heart starting its familiar, nervous rhythm. He sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them, but his presence was still overwhelming. He looked tired. The pain of the severed bond had taken its toll, leaving shadows under his eyes. But his gaze was clear and steady as it rested on her. "How are you, Lyran?" He asked, the question laced with genuine concern. "I am well, Alpha." She hesitated, correcting herself hastily. "I mean, Rykor." "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. "I wanted to apologize," he said, finally turning to look at her fully. "What happened to you? It happened in my home under my watch. The fault is mine. I was blind, and you paid the price for my ignorance. I am sorry." The sincerity in his apology was a balm to her wounded spirit. "It wasn't your fault," she whispered. "She fooled everyone." "She didn't fool you." His voice was grim as he spoke. "I should have seen it." My wolf knew something was wrong. I just didn't listen. He sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Thalia would never have forgiven me for failing her daughter. At the mention of her mother, Liren felt a pang of loss for the woman she barely knew. Saren told me about you and my mother. He smiled, a faint, sad curve of his lips. She was the light of this pack, bright and kind. You have her eyes. He looked at her, and for the first time she didn't feel like a servant or a victim. He was just looking at her. But the strength you have, that's all your own, Liren. To endure what you did for so long in silence, that takes a kind of courage I've rarely seen, even in my best warriors. His praise warmed her in a way the sun couldn't. It was a validation she had never received, a recognition of the steel spine she had to forge in the fires of Valen's hate. They sat like that for a long time talking. He told her more stories of her mother, painting a picture of a woman full of life and laughter. She, in turn, found herself tentatively sharing small things about herself, her love for the books in the library, her fascination with the healer's herb garden. With every word, a layer of fear and subservience peeled away, revealing the young woman who had been buried for so long. He started seeking her out, a walk in the garden, a shared meal in the quiet of the library. It wasn't a courtship. It was a friendship, tentative and fragile, built on a shared history of pain and betrayal. He was healing from a broken bond. She was healing from a broken life. They were two fractured souls finding strange comfort in each other's presence. He taught her about pack politics, about what it meant to be a wolf. He discovered she had a keen mind and sharp intuition. She in turn made him laugh, a real deep laugh that chased the shadows from his eyes. She brought him tea, not as a servant but as a friend who knew he worked too late. One evening, as a chill wind swept through the garden, he noticed her shiver. Without a word, he took off his own thick wool cloak and draped it over her shoulders. The fabric was heavy, warm, and it smelled of him, pine earth, and alpha. She wrapped it around herself, and the simple protective gesture felt more intimate than any touch. When she looked up to thank him, their eyes met. The space between them crackled with a new energy, something more than friendship, more than comfort. It was a spark of awareness, a recognition of something deeper pulling them together. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The alpha's wolf, the one that had been silent and grieving, looked out through his eyes and saw not the ghost of a past love, but a resilient, courageous female who was impossibly calming his storm. The pack was healing, but scars both visible and invisible remained. The soul of Silver Moon had been wounded by Valen's deceit, and the severing of the alpha's sacred bond had left an echo of pain that every member felt. In the aftermath, a fragile quiet settled over the pack house. It was a silence of assessment, of watching, of waiting to see what would come next. And at the center of that quiet observation were their alpha and the girl he had pulled from the shadows. Rykor was a changed man. The agonizing process of breaking his bond had stripped him down to his core, forcing him to confront his own blindness. He emerged from the ordeal not weakened, but forged anew in the fires of regret. The easy authority he once wore had been replaced by a more deliberate, thoughtful leadership. He was more present now, his gaze missing nothing, as if determined never to be fooled again. His pack saw the change and respected it. The grief that had clung to him like a shroud was receding, and they all knew the reason. Her name was Liren. Liren's own transformation was a quieter, more personal revolution. She was no longer a servant, yet the habits of a decade were hard to unlearn. For the first few weeks, she would startle if a warrior addressed her directly. Her hands would instinctively begin to tidy a misplaced cushion, and she would catch herself using the servant's entrance out of pure muscle memory. But with Rykor's steady, patient encouragement, she began to unfurl. He gave her a task. "The pack records are a mess," he told her one morning in the library, gesturing to a stack of dusty ledgers. Valen was supposed to manage the household accounts, but she was more interested in the spending than the recording. It was the closest he came to speaking ill of his former mate. I need someone with a keen eye and a patient mind. I need your help. It was a clever move. It wasn't a demand, but a request. It gave her a purpose beyond simply healing a concrete role within the pack house that had nothing to do with mending clothes or polishing silver. Liren tackled the ledgers with the same meticulous care she had once applied to her cleaning duties. She discovered a sharp mind for numbers and a surprising knack for organization. Within a week, she had untangled years of sloppy accounting, finding discrepancies and wasteful expenditures that Valen had hidden behind charm and distraction. She presented her findings to Rykor, not as a timid servant but as a competent advisor, her notes neat and her logic sound. He listened with rapt attention, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. It was the first time Liren felt not just safe but valued. Her presence began to be felt outside the library walls. One afternoon, she overheard a heated argument coming from the kitchens. Two of the younger she-wolves, Kalia and Brina, were at each other's throats over the rationing of winter herbs. Kalia accused Brina of taking more than her share for her family. Insults were flying and the tension was escalating toward a physical fight. The old Liren would have fled. The new Liren, bolstered by the Alpha's confidence in her, hesitated and then stepped inside. "What's the problem?" she asked, her voice soft but clear, cutting through their angry shouts. They turned on her, surprised. "It's none of your concern." Kalia snapped, her wolf bristling at the intrusion. "I spent many years working with the household supplies," Liren said, stepping toward the herb rack. "I know that the southern-facing wall of the old abbey is covered in thyme. It's sheltered from the worst of the wind and gets the winter sun. The plants there are always strong. There's more than enough for everyone if you know where to look." She then turned her gaze to Brina. "And I know your youngest pup has a persistent cough. A little extra honey and crushed elderberries from the pantry will soothe it better than thyme ever could. Saren will give you some if you ask." The two she-wolves stared at her, their anger deflating. She hadn't taken sides or issued a command. She had simply seen the root of the problem, fear of scarcity and a mother's worry, and offered a practical, compassionate solution. It was the wisdom of a servant now applied with the grace of a leader. Kaelin, who had been drawn by the shouting and had watched the exchange from the doorway, reported the incident to Rykor. That evening, the Alpha looked at Liren with a new level of respect. "You have the heart of a lunar." He told her the words, a quiet revelation for them both. Their bond deepened, woven together in the small moments of daily life. They would work side by side in the library, a comfortable silence between them. He would seek her out at the end of the day, not for counsel, but simply to share a cup of tea and hear about her day. He learned that her profound sense of responsibility and fear of failing his people again. She found the courage to revisit the laundry rooms, the place of her exile. She walked into the steamy, soap-scented air and stood for a long moment simply breathing it in. Saren found her there, her old face etched with concern. "Child, you don't ever have to come down here again," the cook said gently. "I know," Liren replied, a small smile touching her lips. She ran a hand over the rough wood of a folding table, a surface she had scrubbed countless times. "I just needed to see it again, to remember that it has no power over me anymore." It was a final quiet act of reclaiming her own past. The true test came with the first winter snowfall. A fierce, unexpected blizzard swept down from the northern mountains, trapping several hunting parties out in the wilds. Panic began to ripple through the pack. Rykor immediately began organizing the warrior patrols for a search and rescue mission, his face stern and full of authority. Liren watched the flurry of activity, her heart racing with a different kind of fear, one not for herself, but for others. She saw the worried faces of the mates and mothers of the missing wolves. As the warriors prepared for the storm, the families had no choice but to wait, their anxiety mounting. Feeling an instinct she didn't know she had, Lyran took action. She rushed to the kitchen, rallying Serene and the rest of the staff. "We need hot broth blankets and calming tea," she ordered, her voice firm. She moved quickly through the hall, transforming the once chaotic scene into a peaceful sanctuary. She organized the older pups to play with the younger ones, keeping them distracted from their parents' fear. She offered a warm blanket here, a quiet word of comfort there. She sat beside Talia, the mate of a missing hunter, who was trembling with fear. Lyran held her hand, sharing the long hours of waiting in silence. She wasn't acting as Rykor's favorite. She was acting as a member of the pack, caring for its heart while its warriors fought in the storm. When Rykor finally returned hours later, snow-covered and exhausted, with the last of the missing hunters safe but frostbitten, he stopped dead in the doorway of the hall. Instead of finding a crowd in panic, he saw a calm and orderly community united by the quiet strength of one woman. Lyran stood there, her face smudged with soot from the fire, gently tending to a hunter's injured hand, her actions calm and measured. Their eyes met across the room. In that moment, something profound shifted. It wasn't just about healing or friendship anymore. The admiration and affection they shared had deepened into something stronger, something undeniably powerful. His wolf, the restless creature inside him, looked at her and knew without a doubt that she was his true anchor. Later, when the pack house settled and the quiet of the night took over, he found her on a high balcony overlooking the forest. The world was blanketed in a pristine, silent white. Snowflakes drifted down, melting in her dark hair. "I never thought this was possible," he murmured, his voice low and steady, the cold air carrying his breath. He stepped closer, his presence comforting after the bond with Serene had broken. "I felt like part of my soul had been ripped out. I thought I was doomed to be a fractured alpha, leading with only half a heart." He turned to her, his eyes serious and full of emotion that made her heart ache. "My wolf was never truly settled with her. It was fate's bond, an instinct, not a meeting of souls." Rykor paced, fighting himself, never finding peace. "I thought he was just a restless beast," he said, taking another step toward her, his calloused hand lifting to gently cup her cheek. His thumb was warm against her cold skin. "But with you he's quiet. For the first time in my life he's at peace." Lyran's breath caught a tear slipping down her cheek, the emotion overwhelming. "I feel it too," she whispered, her voice shaking. "For so long my heart was a locked room. I never thought I'd let anyone inside. But you didn't try to break down the door. You just waited and showed me it was safe to come out. I know you're not my fated mate," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I thank the goddess for that." And he paused, letting his words sink in. "Fate can be wrong. It can be cruel and blind. But what I feel for you, it's a choice." His gaze softened, full of truth. "It's a conscious, deliberate choice, made with my eyes wide open. I choose you, your courage, your compassion, your quiet wisdom. I choose the scars that tell the story of your strength. I choose to build a new life, a new future with you by my side as my partner, my equal, my lunar. If you'll have me." The word lunar hung in the air between them, shimmering with possibility. It was a title she had never dared dream of. But hearing it from him, it felt as natural as breathing. It felt like coming home. "Yes!" She breathed the word, a puff of white in this cold air. "Yes, Rykor, I will have you." His smile was slow, brilliant, and it transformed his face, erasing the last of the shadows. He leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her lips, not one of desperate passion, but one of deep tenderness. It was a promise of safety, healing, and a new dawn. It marked the closing of a painful chapter and the beginning of a new story, one written by two souls who found each other in the wreckage and chose to build something beautiful and strong. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. He took her hand, fingers lacing together, and gently pressed a kiss to her scarred arm, a reverence for a wound deeper than flesh. He wasn't erasing her past. He was honoring her survival. From the balcony, they looked out over their packlands, the snow falling softly around them. For the first time, Lyran didn't feel like a shadow. She stood in the light beside her alpha, her partner, her love. The scars would always be part of her story, a reminder of the darkness she had overcome. But they no longer defined her. Her future was as bright and boundless as the horizon ahead, and she would face it not as a servant or a victim, but as the chosen lunar of the Silver Moon Pack. And so the servant girl with secret scars became the lunar with an unbreakable spirit. Rykor and Lyran's journey shows us that true bonds aren't always forged by fate, but are chosen built on respect and healed through courage and love. They prove that the deepest wounds can be overcome, and a new dawn is always possible, even after the longest, darkest night. What did you think of Lyran's incredible transformation? Let me know in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of survival and love against all odds, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with a friend who loves a powerful romance. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next tale. Thanks for listening.